To make the most of my time when I'm working on a project that doesn't require much higher brain function, I try to accompany it with a number of YouTube explainer videos. The idea being, at least I can learn something while the repetitive task goes on. An entire subgenre of these are YouTube channels discussing amusement parks, the rides, the building of them, the planning, the ramifications, all of the aspects of what we think of as groups of rides and parks that have trains and trams, amusement areas. And having listened to many, many hours going in all sorts of directions, I feel like there are lessons to be learned in the history, the maintenance, the management of amusement parks. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Daniel Boyd, Jeff Atwood, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. Probably the king of amusement park history and breakdown videos is Kevin Perjurer's Defunctland. I became aware of Defunctland while working on the Action Park documentary because his channel had made an overview of what Action Park was. It wasn't deep into the intrigue. It certainly didn't have all of the information that the later documentary Class Action Park did. But for what it was, Perjurer did an amazing job going into all of the details and the timeline in a clear and informative way that provided the audience with just what they needed to know if they didn't have any personal context with Action Park. I didn't watch that video or later ones, mostly because I didn't think there was much in there for me. The idea of sitting back and spending minutes going over why an amusement park lived, had some problems, and then closed just didn't seem like a great use of time. But I finally gave him the well-deserved attention. And after going through many of his videos, I started to find out about other channels that did different but similar subject matter, going into the beginning and the middle and the end of entire amusement places, the history of the families that built them, and what factors caused them to close, take away rides, or change ownership. From this admittedly self-driven college course of amusement parks, I feel there's lessons to be learned because we work in technical fields of creative work, personal achievement, and there's a lot to learn about what you do in the context of an amusement park. Specifically, amusement parks are in physical space. They are pieces of land carved either from family holdings or from somebody with a dream moving into a town. And in almost every case, the town has an understandably skeptical approach to what this person or this business is trying to do. We are long past the time when people would think every single new massive entity in their town would do them well. It's a true devil's bargain to suddenly have 100 or 200 acres represent something that's going to draw in crowds, use infrastructure, require the local police and government to keep track of things, and generally eat up resources, especially, as is sometimes the case, with no real direct benefit to the town, except maybe a little extra traffic to your businesses. Long ago, proposing something like this turned into a years-long ordeal, with governments and populations having their say in whether or not these endeavors should be taking over the town, should be plunked down in the middle of some idyllic, isolated area. Initially, Kevin Perjurer would talk about a specific ride, some sort of roller coaster or dark ride where you would go on a boat and go inside of a building. But over time, he started to see the wider context of how things would come to be. The fact that a single person or group of people would put together the idea of an amusement park and then start to fabricate and experiment to either great success or extremely limited success. To this end, amusement parks are absolutely like any other large-scale creative work that is dependent on an audience to find itself afloat. Amusement parks need the income of tickets and people buying food and trinkets to survive. Without that lifeblood, no amount of advertising, advocates, and investors is going to make it live beyond a few years. So things that I found were thematically the same in a lot of Kevin Perjurer's videos were how many of these entities require pretty unpleasant conditions for their work staff. You're hiring people of a pretty young age, telling the town that this is a way to give the kids something to do during the peak months in summer, and also having people who work there for a very long time with very nebulous job descriptions, maybe something called park manager or services manager, that actually represents a dozen different roles that they have to click into every day to keep things running. I was perhaps surprised, but then not surprised, how loose many of these jobs are, how people will find themselves trying to clean up a major mess in the food area, only to turn around and work with costume mascots or a money problem or something mechanical and closing off part of the park while the repair people are brought in. That fluidity seems to be endemic through most amusement parks. Another theme that struck me was how arbitrary much of the planning is. For the real gold star AAA amusement parks, there are professional firms that can be hired. One of them is Aero, who did roller coasters, but then there are also individual consultants. The idea being that either on the fly or after doing lots of simulation, you come up with methods or mechanical choices to make sure that the right amount of people are moving through at any given time. Perhaps it shouldn't be surprising to know that roller coasters have rides per day metrics that can be tuned up and down as needed. In fact, if there's one section of all of Defunctland's videos, of everybody's videos, that really dawned on me, it was the idea of how a roller coaster has a lifespan. Looking back, this is obvious. It's made of metal and parts that are being stressed all the time. The drive to make something new and thrilling and really engage the audience so they'll return again and again means you are building a machine with all of these parts that are constantly, unendingly being pushed to their limits. You can add all sorts of monitoring and you can put in all sorts of safety and guards to prevent anything tragic happening. But regardless, after a decade or two, the roller coaster is not the way it came onto the lot. It can be disassembled, refurbished, and put back. And in some cases, they do this, selling roller coasters, entire roller coasters, between different parks, like they're some sort of vehicle or building supplies. But with very little exception, you end up getting to some point that the roller coaster needs to actually be retired. Somehow this flew over my head. I would think of it that they were getting bored, that they were no longer interested in having a tiger or a goblin-themed ride, and they just wanted to end it. But Perjurer showed me that no, they would rebrand, they would put in different decoration if they wanted a quote-unquote new roller coaster. The addition of black lights or new things installed by the side, those are modular. You can turn a ride that is this way today into something completely new looking next month, even if the curves are the same. No, it's that lifespan, that idea that even what feels as immutable as a massive roller coaster needs to eventually move on. In the context of the Internet Archive, there are a variety of amusement park conferences and conference proceedings, allowing me to see exactly what they were discussing. Best ways to do concessions, ways to deal with staff and staffing, what video games and other sorts of simple vending machines might present itself to an amusement park. Naturally, you have things like the Disney parks and Universal. These are massive operations that are involving billions of dollars. But on the side, there are so many other parks that have decades and many generations of family involved that represent for them, literally, a family business that is always evolving, always shaping itself, always working either with or sometimes against its staff to find the next thing that will drive people to come in. Bringing in bands, having Halloween or summertime events, being able to open up during holidays like Christmas that would otherwise be dormant. All of this business side, this entity where you're trying to bring in the most people, is in many ways so much like projects that I've been involved in. Projects like documentary watching or working on collections at the archive, thinking about not just what I think needs to be there, but where people themselves show you where you have to go. If a ride runs at 50% capacity, no amount of your belief that it's actually a great ride matters. What matters is you need to talk to people to find out what they are expecting and what you can do to help with that. In the same way, projects I've worked on that I thought would become the top of everybody's mind languish for years until randomly somebody reframes it, rephrases it as go look at this, and suddenly my long-forgotten, long-dismissed effort comes rising up as if I thought of it yesterday. In these amusement park videos is a sense that beyond the money, beyond the business and the engineering, there's a human factor, a person who comes to an amusement park with a crush or a date or a family will build on the foundation of this machinery, of these places, their own narrative, their own story, and they will come back from it wholly uncognizant, wholly unaware of what was going on in the back end. It feels, in other words, after all of these hours of watching these films and explainers about Disney and other companies that built themselves up in the physical space after having dreams otherwise, that there is a story that lives beyond us, that no amount of our planning and preferences can affect. The moment when the sun comes up over the things we have built, and this stage, this dream we have made real, becomes a backstage to other people's, frankly, much more important personal stories. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It. Thanks to James Bekoyanu, Mark Pilgrim, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Craig Talbert, Dileep Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Martin, Symbionts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. I talked a lot about Kevin Perjurer's work. He is Defunctland, and the reason I love his particular videos so much is because not only is he putting together more and more complicated works, but his works are reflecting that depth of insight that comes from learning about a whole range of a subject. Not just that there were roller coasters, not just that Disney used to have this ride and it became that ride, but has started to really understand all of the matrix of how all of these things interrelate and become what they are. You don't just walk in and find something is a certain height or that it's this far off the road for no reason. Things happened, and Kevin Perjurer has been doing such an amazing job, and Defunctland walks you through it. There's even a documentary that I wouldn't have expected where he endorsed it, produced it, but didn't have anything to do with its production. It's a documentary about an experiment by Disney to create a space rock band that would play, and they only played for 1 year and never again. Those kind of insights and those kind of works is why I say, even if you think you don't care that much about amusement parks, his channel is a channel worth watching.